It's December 29th, 1989. On the freezing cold courtyard of Prague Castle, a jubilant crowd applauds the newly elected president of the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic. He is 53-year-old Václav Havel, playwright and dissident, a man who, just that spring, was still in prison. This moment marks the culmination of the transition from totalitarianism to democracy in Czechoslovakia, an event that will enter history as the Velvet Revolution. Havel, its central figure, begins at the end of 1989 to write not only a new chapter in the nation's history, but also in his own life story, which, at first glance, seems almost unbelievable. Václav Havel was born on October 5, 1936, into a family deeply rooted in cultural and business circles. His father, Václav Maria Havel, was a construction entrepreneur who built, among other projects, Prague's Barrandov terraces. His grandfather, Václav Havel, constructed Prague's Lucerna Palace, and his uncle, Miloš Havel, founded the film studios at Barrandov. Václav's mother was the daughter of journalist and diplomat Václav Vavrečka. The communists entered young Václav's life when he was just 12 years old. After the coup of 1948, the regime confiscated all of the Havel's property, and some family members went into exile. The regime's oppression also directly affected Václav himself. For political reasons, he was barred from attending grammar school and trained instead as a chemical laboratory technician. Later, after several unsuccessful attempts to enroll in a social sciences-focused university, he studied at the Faculty of Economics at the Czech Technical University. Even during his secondary school years, Václav Havel began pursuing his passion, literature. At the age of 15, he wrote his first poems. Later, in 1956, he co-founded a student literary group called the 36ers. At 23, through the recommendation of actor Jan Verick, he started working as a stagehand at the ABC Theatre. A year later, he moved to the Theatre na Zábradlí, first as a stagehand, then as a dramaturge, and eventually as a resident playwright. It was at this theatre that his play The Garden Party premiered in December 1963.
Musíme tak nějak věřit v člověka.
The story of Hugo Pludek, an ambitious young man who achieved social success by mastering empty, meaningless phrases, sparked a tremendous reaction. The play made Václav Havel one of the most prominent figures in the Czech cultural scene. This was also a joyful time in his personal life. After an 8-year relationship, he married Olga Šplikalova. Their marriage lasted 31 years, and Olga became one of the most important people in his life. She served as his link to the outside world while he was in prison and was his closest advisor in 1989 when he debated whether to accept the presidency. Several years after her death, Havel stated that it was Olga who, during the height of his fame, ensured he never lost his sense of self-reflection. This makes it all the more paradoxical that Havel had affairs with many other women during their marriage. Saying he continually cheated on Olga wouldn't be entirely accurate. He went even further. He openly informed her about his affairs and even sent letters to his lovers through her while he was in prison. To make things even more absurd, when Olga started a relationship in the 1980s with actor Jan Kaspar, Havel struggled to accept it and pressured her to end the affair. During the so-called Prague Spring of 1968, Václav Havel was one of the regime's leading critics. After the Soviet invasion in August 1968, he joined student strikes and openly condemned the situation in Czechoslovakia. The consequences came swiftly. He was forced to leave the theatre, and although he was celebrated abroad as a playwright, his works were banned from Czech stages. At that time, Havel alternated between living in Prague and his cottage in Hradeček in northern Bohemia. Despite the restrictions, he never stopped writing. While working as a manual laborer in the Trutnov brewery, he penned some of his most iconic plays, including Audience, which has since become a classic.
A co jste to vlastně psal, jestli se teda můžu zeptat?
Divadelní hry.
Divadelní hry? A to se hrálo někde na divadle?
Ano.
Václav Havel's most intense battle with the communist regime began in 1977. In January, Charter 77, a manifesto calling for the respect of human rights in Czechoslovakia was published. Havel was not only one of its co-authors, but also one of its first spokespeople. The regime acted swiftly. Havel was arrested and held in pre-trial detention from January to May. It was not the last time. As a leading figure of the dissent, Havel ultimately spent more than 4 years in prison. After his final release in May 1989, he played a key role in drafting the petition called A Few Sentences, which was signed by tens of thousands of people. By that time, it was already clear that the regime was beginning to collapse. In November 1989, following the police crackdown on students in the center of Prague, Václav Havel took the lead in the newly formed movement called Civic Forum. After 2 decades of stagnation, events began to unfold at a revolutionary pace. Just 40 days after the establishment of Civic Forum, the still communist parliament elected dissident Václav Havel as president of the republic. After years of communist grey-suited officials, Václav Havel appeared as a revelation. He was spontaneous, undiplomatic, and deeply human. History would remember not only small details, like his short pant legs during the presidential inauguration, but also his significant achievements. During his first visit to the United States in February 1990, Havel addressed both houses of Congress. His speech was interrupted numerous times by applause, with lawmakers often standing to give prolonged ovations.
Když mne 27. října zatýkali, žil jsem v zemi, kde vládla nejkonzervativnější komunistická vláda v Evropě a celá společnost dřímala pod příkrovem totalitního systému. Po necelých 4 měsících k vám promlouvám jako představitel země, která se vydala na cestu k demokracii, v níž je plná svoboda slova, která se připravuje na svobodné volby, chce budovat prosperující tržní ekonomiku a dělat svou vlastní zahraniční politiku.
Václav Havel was also the first president from behind the former Iron Curtain to deliver a speech at NATO's headquarters in Brussels. As the head of the presiding country, he announced in Prague the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, the military alliance of the Soviet bloc in Central and Eastern Europe. For the first time in many years, the Czechoslovak president became someone whom not only world political leaders, but also intellectuals and celebrities were eager to meet. However, on domestic level, Havel did not have an easy time. He had to swallow the disappointment of the division of Czechoslovakia into 2 independent states, an agreement reached by then Czech and Slovak prime ministers Václav Klaus and Vladimir Mečiar. Later, as the post-revolutionary euphoria faded, people began to criticize him increasingly for various reasons. He was blamed for the Velvet Revolution's failure to adequately deal with prominent communists, secret police agents, and other members of the security forces. His broad amnesty, which released many criminals and was followed by a rise in crime, became a frequent target of reproach. Others accused him of allowing privatization processes that resulted in the theft of billions in state assets. Critics also claimed that, as head of state, he constantly gave way to Prime Minister Klaus on the domestic political stage. Havel himself considered much of this criticism unjust and took it quite hard. The hardest moments came for Havel in 1996. In January, his wife Olga passed away, and in December, Havel himself faced serious health issues. Doctors removed a malignant lung tumor. Although the operation was deemed successful, Havel remained precariously close to the edge of life and death for some time. For the rest of his life, he would suffer from frequent lung infections. During this period, actress Dagmar Veškrnova was closest to him. She visited him in the hospital and cared for him. However, it came as a shock to many when Václav Havel quietly married Dagmar just 1 year after Olga's death. In January 1998, Havel was re-elected as president. He served until 2003, when he could not run for a third term under the constitution. He then returned to his original profession as a playwright and writer. He penned the play called Leaving, which he later adapted into a film, making his directorial debut. He also continued exploring philosophical themes such as the individual's role in society, freedom, and human rights. Due to his declining health, Havel appeared in public only rarely during this period. However, on December 10, 2011, he made an exception. At an event under his personal patronage called Forum 2000, he met with his friend, the Dalai Lama.
Welcome, thank you for coming. Welcome in Prague. Unfortunately, I am ill.
Havel smiled during their meeting, but his frailty was unmistakable. Today, we know that this was his final public appearance. 8 days later, at his cottage in Hradeček, Václav Havel passed away at the age of 75. The coffin with the remains of Václav Havel was transported to Vladislav Hall at Prague Castle on Wednesday, 21st December 2011 from the former St. Anne's Church, now called Prague Crossroads. Tens of thousands of people said goodbye to him on the way. The state funeral took place the day before Christmas on Friday the 23rd of December at Prague Castle, with dozens of statesmen from all over the world in attendance.